Brittany, you want to take it away?
Yeah, definitely. All right. Good morning and hi, everyone. My name is Britani Bahr, and I am a three-year graduate student. And I just want to thank everyone for coming today. I'm going to attach a link to my website down here below in the chat if everyone can see that. And I invite everyone to check out my website after my presentation just for better resolution. But I do ask that everyone follows along on the Zoom screen as I will be navigating you through the entire site. And I'm going to share my screen here with you all. All right. What would it be like if humans perceived the world with a biocentric view? More specifically, what would this look like for architecture? As it currently stands, everything revolves around human perception and thinking. Instead of viewing a place as mutual territory for every existing organism, we question how it will be used and interacted only by humans. Architecture is no different. The core of the built environment is based on the efficiency and the study at the human scale, with the purpose of creating a safe, comfortable, and inspiring habitat for mankind. But what happens when the focus shifts towards wildlife, their natural habitat, and their social interactions with humans? In what ways can we design to create an educational experience and obscure the gradient between wildlife and humans? This thesis will explore wildlife habitat that has become urbanized and how it can be restored to an ecosystem where wildlife and humans can live amongst one another. By creating a coexisting habitat for wildlife and humans, we can learn how to create positive interactions and observe the species in their native habitats. Creating a coexisting habitat for mankind and animals is critical in the evolution of wildlife as urban cities continue to grow. This thesis will look at the Henry Meyer Festival grounds located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as a site, and the image you are viewing is a collage of the site with layered Sanborn maps upon one another, giving an introduction to the site's history and evolving conditions. More specifically, this thesis explores the Children's Zone area, which is on the left side of the park, and the Lakeshore State Park across the water basin. And here is another perspective view, again, of the Lakeshore State Park and the Children's Zone area. The Lakeshore State Park was built in 2007 to attract urban wildlife, especially with its perfect location along the Oakleaf Trail in Lake Michigan. Today, it is much more of a human attraction than home to wildlife. The Henry Meyer Festival grounds have been around for more than 100 years. The site has a rich history from starting as a train station in the 1900s to the Maitland Airport in 1927, later becoming the Nike missile site in 1956, and eventually home to the Summerfest grounds in 1968. Unfortunately today, 9 out of the 12 months of the year, it sits vacant, which is a missed opportunity with its location along Lake Michigan. Located in the Henry Meyer Festival grounds currently sits a lackluster Children's Zone area, which is not utilized as much as it could be. This thesis looks at how to redesign the Children's Zone area and create an educational experience and new definition of play by creating a connection between the Children's Zone area and the Lakeshore State Park. To begin the research, verbs that describe both human and animal behavior associated with play were studied and collected. From the chosen verbs, different objects were sketched and defined based on how they would be used by humans of different age groups as well as wildlife. The verbs that were deemed most successful based on how well they incorporated both human and animal interactions were further developed and evaluated based on how the type of play may shift in correspondence to the season and time of day. This was done to ensure the site would be utilized daily and seasonally, whether it be by humans or wildlife. Many different types of species of wildlife can be found around the site, but only 9 species were chosen to design for based on current or future needs for their survival in urban cities. The list of species includes the red fox, the great horned and snowy owl, the groundhog, mink, fish and birds of many species, the big and little brown bat, fireflies, and bees. After deciding on these 9 species, their ecology cycles were studied to observe how each would affect and interact with the other species and the site. To continue this research, an energy flow diagram was created to inform how these species may move and inhabit the site. I then further studied the ecology of the site, more specific to the design of the objects and landscape. Design choices were made based on the flow of the movement of each species and their relationship to the site. Throughout the site, 6 play objects can be found, including the rolling mounds, the observation tower, the elevated path, the bat and owl towers, the pavilion, and the educational center. The rolling mounds are created around the entirety of the site as the landscape. The mounds grow in elevation throughout the site, rising the highest in the back right corner where the education center is located under. These mounds are made up of different layers that create a different experience and use as they are passed by. The different layers consist of grass, sand, dirt, concrete, and glazing. The grass influences human and animal play and habitat for foxes. The sand and dirt create groundhog and mink habitat, and the concrete and glazing denote of the education center below the topography. The mounds can be used for play by both humans and wildlife. The observation tower is used to overlook the site, Lake Michigan, and the Lakeshore State Park, creating views that are both educational and picturesque. The observation tower also creates living walls for plants and birds with a blooming garden within the walls of each floor. These gardens influence habitat and seed disbursement by birds throughout the site. The observation tower was designed to imitate a tree to blend into the site. The legs of the tower resemble the trunks and branches, while each floor can be thought of as the crown of a tree. The form of each floor is also irregular and fluid, much like the topography below it. The legs of the tower extend into the water below and are covered in vegetation which help create habitat. The legs are also made out of wood, which will help attract an array of fish. A rich aquatic life within the water basin promotes healthy underwater vegetation, as well as fishing opportunities for those visiting. And similar to the observation tower, the elevated path creates views above the site, whether it be utilized by humans or wildlife. The design of this path was influenced by the organic nature of Lake Michigan, which the site is situated on. The elevated path also connects to the Lakeshore State Park, which benefits the children at the Education Center to ensure a quick and safe navigation to and from the park. It is also a necessary connection point to help encourage wildlife to travel this path instead of nearby roadways. The elevated path will be supported by the surrounding trees that currently inhabit the site, as well as additional trees planted in the bat and owl towers. Located within the path is a 500 square foot netting structure. This structure acts as a trampoline for activity in the daytime, but will also serve as a relaxation spot. This spot may be used at nighttime, especially during concerts under the pavilion. This will provide a place to relax and listen to music filling the park. Along with the trees being used as structure to the elevated path, the bat and owl tower will help support the path in specific areas. The bat and owl tower is designed to inhabit bats through 6-inch vertical openings. Big and little brown bats, specifically found on this site, are commonly found in the walls of a home, and this tower will mimic the same layering effect found in the cavities of a wall. The top of the tower is designed to inhabit the owl, which resembles a recess in a tree where owls are most commonly found. This tower also allows for human interaction underneath it. Each tower has a shape that is unique to one another, but all feature the same bent and twisted look. The shape of the tower allows for a stable structure for the elevated path and helps blend the tower with the surrounding trees. The pavilion is created above the entrance of the site and continued throughout the path to create a whimsical experience with plant and flower growth above. It also leads to the stage pavilion in the back of the site. Parts of the pavilion will span nest-like twine that allows birds to inhabit the space, which also encourage plant growth on both sides of the site. The pavilion was designed to mimic the bending and falling of trees that often provide habitat in the wild. Specifically at the entrance, there are 2 gardens on each side of the path. The spanning of the pavilion also above helps birds fertilize both sides of the garden. The garden will also be surrounded by natural wood, which creates habitat for fireflies and bees. Both of these species, in return, promote a healthy garden. Students at the Educational Center will benefit by learning about the ecosystem of a garden and the wildlife and species that inhabit it. Today, there is a current plan to add an educational center on the Lakeshore State Park. This park is already limited on native grasses, so including the center on the wild play site will create more space for habitat at Lakeshore State Park. The Education Center is located on the south end of the site, under the rolling mounds. Having the center pushed underground allows for use on top, which grants more space that may be used for play and habitat. The form of the education center was influenced by the topography above. Moments of glazing are also included in the mounds layers to allow in light, which influenced where the programs were located in the educational center. As well as entries within the mounds, there will also be back entries which will be able to be seen and peel up from the sidewalk view on the right side of the festival grounds. The Education Center will host students on school trips and weekend activities for park visitors. Those at the Educational Center will get the opportunity to learn about wildlife in their native habitat and be able to be an active participant to nature. Workshops and galleries will also be hosted by the Educational Center that will be available to those of all ages. Another important aspect to this project is to really understand the perspective of the wildlife that is inhabiting the park. So down here, you will find a perspective of each of the chosen species and what it would be like to experience the site through their eyes. I've also attached an accompanying audio to help you further place yourself in their perspective. I will briefly take you through these, but I do invite you to further explore them on your own for better image quality.
Teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well.
Designing for both wildlife and humans is important to bring visibility and awareness to urban wildlife, not only because it benefits them, but it also benefits humans. Incorporating wildlife habitat and design will be the future for maintaining a healthy and balanced ecosystem as urban cities continue to grow. I now invite you to take a few minutes to further explore this website on your own for better image quality, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brittany. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I was chair of Brittany's thesis committee, and Chris Cornelius and Jennifer Current were also on the committee. We'll kind of sit in the background and maybe interject some comments here and there, but we open it up to questions and comments from our esteemed critics. Thank you.
So should I just jump in here? Wow, there's a lot going on here, Brittany.
There is a lot going on.
I guess I'll just jump in because I went through the school when it was still a 3.5-year program. So I came from German language, literature, and psychology, and then and was dragged through the mud there. So I sort of have an affinity, I think, to what you're doing. One question I have, and because I know the area, and I probably also played there when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I understood where all this is at. But the one thing I'm curious about is this something that's open to the public outside of the park,
yes.
the Henry Meyer Park? It is.
Yes.
Okay. And then we approach that then from the north, and then we can sort of wind down through all the bridges and things that are there at the moment. No?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, like I said, there's a lot going on here. I didn't realize that there was this much wildlife down there. Is that something that's sort of a given that you're trying to accommodate, or is that something that you're hoping to initiate with the project?
So I actually met with the DNR about this site and talked with them about, because I found early on in my research, I found that there was so many species of wildlife that were supposed to be down in this area. And I was actually questioning the same thing, like, are these animals actually down here? Because I don't know if for those of you who haven't seen the Lakeshore State Park, it's basically just open field with one tree, which is funny that they consider it a habitat for a lot of wildlife that is out there right now. And after meeting with the DNR, they said that all those animals can be found out there, but they're all living in incorrect habitats right now for them. So they're all just living within the rocks. Like even the foxes are all just living in the rocks that are down there. So I think that further inspired me to create this and give them a better habitat for what they're equipped for.
Okay. And I mean, I've been down there with my kids every once in a while when we're there in the summer visiting my parents, but is there that much going on, for example, throughout the seasons? I mean, I imagine in spring and of course in the summer and in the fall, there's a lot going on. Is there a lot going on, for example, in the winter? Is that a season that's a little bit more, that's maybe left over, where the area is more left over to the animals, or are there things that go on down there at that period of time during the year?
Yeah, so currently nothing happens down there, which is also another inspiration for this project, just because it is a site that sits there and only really is utilized when all the festivals are going on in the summer. So then creating this site where it does create opportunities for winter activities, like for example, within the rolling mounds, those could be used for winter play. But I think even just creating the habitat for the animals helps utilize the site on the other times, like for winter example, when it's not being utilized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, pardon me, interesting is always a loaded word. I find it really, find it fascinating because, of course, urban areas and green areas, and especially down there in that area, it's been developed or is being developed at the moment quite a bit.
Right.
And I mean, I've seen a lot going on from ideas for new towers worked out through, I think it was some of the students from some of the local trade schools, up to what I think the couture that's going on there, and of course all those larger developments. It's a nice sort of interjection in what I remember being a very very sort of reduced and cold space. So I think it's nice, and it would be an interesting oasis for the wildlife and of course for the people. I mean, the one thing that I've appreciated since I've been back every once in a while is that there is a green space down there, sort of just before or over the course of the last, I don't know when it was actually developed, maybe in the last 10 years, but that there is a green space at the end of the coast there, right behind the, I've forgotten the name of the museum, but the White Museum there. That people can go to, and that I've really appreciated with my boys when we're zipping around or doing something down there. So I think it would be an interesting addition, and in a positive sense. Unfortunately, wrong word, but it's like I said, there's a lot going on, and it would be a lot for people to explore, and of course for the wildlife to take advantage of.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Brittany, can I ask what your background is? What did you do your undergraduate degree in? Are you a biologist or?
Math.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. but with that being said, I was pre-pharmacy for 3 years, so I did have to take all the biology classes.
Stuff, yeah.
So yeah, so I did have that interest as well.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, but I think just to echo what others have said, both your colleagues, but already, it's an incredible array of different architectural solutions, and you're really to be commended for biting off an enormous amount of stuff to design, basically, and kind of problems that you're trying to solve. So you're really to be commended for that. Well done. I'm glad to see that you're being so bold. I think there's two things. I think I would love to maybe hear what you have to say, but also, again, if you had some time in your future life, I went back and I revisited my thesis project actually because it bugged me so much. But I mean, one of the actors, I think one of the interesting things about this project is thinking about the different actors who are going to be involved here, and also at different times of day, which I thought was really interesting in your website. But one of the actors you haven't really talked about is the environment. So notions like, if this is on, you say it's on Lake Michigan, is that right?
Yes.
So obviously I don't know that much about the situation, but you know, if water levels are going to start to rise, what does that do to your site? If summers get more and more blisteringly hot, if winds increase, etc. I think it'd be really interesting for you to think about this over the next 10, 12, 20 years in terms of climate change. Right. And how that would influence not only on the animals, but also what you're encouraging, you know, the architecture that you're making. Did you have time to think about that in amongst all the other stuff you were doing?
I didn't, but I think that's a really interesting aspect to it, and especially when you talk about rising water levels, because right now the Lakeshore State Park is a man-made park, and it's just sitting not very high up. So that's interesting to think about, even just in terms of that, like if that area could be lost within that. And I think that'd be a really good a good thing to look at into the project.
So there's water and there's wind and there's heat and all those sorts of things I think would definitely kind of change this. And you might need to rethink the things that you're designing. For example, I think it's your pavilion tower, you know, how it enters the water when timber gets wet and dries out, and you know, those kinds of things would maybe have to make you think about your materiality quite a bit. But don't forget about it, because I think we can all expect some pretty significant changes to occur in the next sort of decades.
Right.
The other thing that I think, where if you handed this off to me, we used to do this in studios sometimes, particularly with the younger students, is we would take somebody's project and hand it on to the next student and force them to then take the next step, which students hate. So if I were to take this off of you and start designing it now, I would be looking at, you know, I can't remember, 1 to 4 details. Here we say 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Anyway, like very intensive details. Sure. Because I think it would really symbolize your thoughts about all this, the notion of how person and nature comes together. So one of your images is of how the tree walk latches onto the tree. And I would love to know, you know, again, if you had 6 more weeks, to develop those really specific details, because it's not just about, you know, if you have a particular joint with the tree and then bees will nest up underneath it, but it's also just your attitude, your philosophy about how the tectonic of what you're making then embraces or doesn't embrace, marks itself out as different or very similar to the existing sort of natural phenomena. I think, you know, I'm sure they've made you read Gottfried Semper quite a lot, and he was obsessed with connections. And I think those connections for you are extremely important. You know, how your buildings meet the ground, how they meet the water, how they meet the trees, and things like that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that point. I think that's an excellent point to make and take this further.
I know the architect who designed the Kew Gardens, I don't know if you looked at that as a precedent, but the tree walk at Kew Gardens, and Julia Barfield, and she spent months and months and months thinking about how those connections were going to work. And then they had a really beautiful offshoot, which was the way that they sound, because they kind of move in the wind, and things that they weren't necessarily expecting. But those details for you, I would think would be extremely important, not just in terms of making it work and last, but also your sort of philosophical thoughts about how people meet nature. So
yeah, definitely. Oh, I'm just looking at the chat here. Sorry, I didn't see that was going on before as well.
If I could jump in, Brittany. Hello, Thank you for your presentation. Wonderful. Okay, so the things I really appreciate about this project are the sense of voice that you have. I always feel like thesis is a really important moment in a student's education in order to develop their personal voice, and it has to do with the visual language that you use and deploy, and it's so consistent and really well done and very thorough, and I really applaud you for that.
Thank you.
I think my critique of the project goes back to the beginning, and in terms of thinking about, I mean, it's not just a you question. It's like a architectural discipline question, which is how, you know, there are a lot of projects that we're seeing nowadays that are pushing into the, you know, designing for other species a lot in the architectural discourse and architectural productivity. It's in the ether that a lot of people are thinking about this. And so it's kind of a rhetorical question, but I feel like what's missing from this for me is your sort of big why. Like, I understand you've executed a version of how we could think about, you know, how we could deploy something that would try and do this. I think it runs in because it's a pretty small site actually. And when I look at your ecological diagrams, it's a closed loop and you don't tap into, I mean, when you're talking about wildlife and especially birds, I guess some of them will be landlocked and they won't be able to go very far, but unless they get on the highway or something, but other ones will, I mean, there's much, when you think ecologically, you really need to think much more broadly, systematically in terms of the bigger systems. There's migration that goes intercontinental, and then, you know, there's smaller loops of ecological loops that happen. And so I think just, so I think that's part of the big philosophical question of the why, again, I can't answer it. I don't even have a strong opinion about it, whether we should or shouldn't do it. I have actually, a colleague and I were looking at some projects and he just got so angry that this person was designing bat caves or bat boxes or something like that, or beehives. Anyway, I was like, I don't really why hate it? Like, I don't know, but is it architecture? Is it landscape architecture? Is it industrial design? Is it some other kind of design? I don't know, like, it's design. So I think that's important and I'm willing to engage with it at that level. But I do think, you know, for me, those are the big questions. It's sort of, I don't feel like you fully convinced me of the why we should do this, like why this is a good thing. It's like, you kind of end up with, well, it's good for humans to be able to observe animals or habitats, but I don't think that's enough. I think there's more you could say about it, and there's definitely lots of philosophy and even Thoreau or something about observational places, and that might change the architecture in terms of more places of stopping and looking rather than always moving and making it such a park. So yeah, that's not really a question like that I expect you to answer right now, but it's what I'm thinking as I look at this. But again, that's not to diminish how beautiful, you know, your architecture is really interesting and great. I mean, the building stuff and the voice is just, that's really, that's inspiring to me. It's something I aspire to as a professor, to try and get students to see how the way that we draw and make things matters to what we're trying to say about it. So good job on that.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing that point up as well.
Brittany, maybe related to Jori's question, I was wondering if you imagined this project to be a zoo or a nature preserve, or a new way that we think about kind of building or developing cities. Yeah, I think it's related to your kind of position and your attitude about the role of the built environment and the relationships between humans and animals.
Right, and I definitely intended this project to be something that we can start to look at and how we can start to attach or just build buildings to accommodate for wildlife. So definitely not a zoo aspect. I think that also is important because I'm not trying to create forced observations for the animals. I'm just trying to create opportunities where animals and humans can interact. And it's kind of like another sense of a project, like we started thinking about green buildings. What happens now if we take this a step further and start thinking about if we can design buildings that can accommodate for this habitat attack.
In that sense, I would definitely encourage you to kind of think beyond or think bigger about the kind of ecological systems and kind of needs of each of these specific types of animals that you chose to work with. Because at the moment, to me, it feels a little bit like a zoo, like a more kind of sensitive approach to a zoo maybe. But I think there are there's a ton of kind of specificities with regards to all of the kind of inhabitants and users, human or non-human, that I think would be really interesting and exciting to dive deeper into. And just as an example, for instance, I'm not sure if you thought much about the kind of relationships between the animals that are existing within this and what the kind of prey kind of relationships might be between them. Or at one point you mentioned that there's a concert that might happen and the animals are kind of around you, but my immediate reaction was like really loud sounds or types of music, you know, like really kind of things that humans might do and engage in might be actually very terrible for some animals, right? And so I think just like right now there's a super positive, optimistic, utopian, idealistic kind of cloud around the project, which I think is partially your very bright and sunny and wonderful, you know, personality. But I just would encourage you to be a little more, not pessimistic, but maybe a little more critical about some of the moves that you're making and the relationships that you're creating within this kind of ecosystem that you've designed or developed.
Right, and I totally agree with you, Nikole. I think there's a lot of parts of this project that are just idealized, that the animals and humans are just going to be there. And again, like I said, I'm not necessarily creating these forced interactions, but more so opportunities. But I have thought about that in the sense of what animals I was also designing for. Like I had mentioned, I was designing for animals that were needed for survival in urban cities, that needed habitat in urban areas. But another one of the animals that I could have designed for would have been a coyote. And I feel like while that might not be scary to some people, that creates issues for then people wanting to be down in this area. So I did try and isolate it in that sense of what I was designing for. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Another way to think about it, Brittany, what Nikole's talking about, is to think about your perspectives, you know, in your website. So that it's not just a visual perspective, it's the perspective of, there's a sonic perspective, but also where they gather their food, where they get their water, where they give birth, all those sorts of things. Like perspective for an animal isn't just what they're looking at when they look out of a little hole. So that you could expand the notion of what perspective means for animals, because perspective for us in our visually driven world is definitely not what most animals deal with. So that might be a way of developing it on the website.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
There are a couple of great questions from some Syrup alums in the chat. I don't know if you want to address those, not to take the mic away from anyone, but I think they're pertinent to the questions or conversation.
Definitely read through these. So
I don't know if Cameron or Ben want to speak up.
I can read through these too and answer them. So what is the process of planting and developing these ecosystems? So I don't know if I necessarily am following on this question, but the process of planting and developing these ecosystems is that they're kind of already down in this area. And I'm creating now just a further connection and a stronger connection for them to be in this area, if that makes sense. What would humans interfere during? That's a good question. So this one says, would humans interfere during the early stages? Are animals and plants left alone to grow for a number of years before humans are allowed? So because if this was injected in like a suburban area, I would totally agree with that. And I think they would have to be left alone for a while for these animals to adapt. But because all these animals that are found in this area are typically animals that are used to urban settings, I think it would be a little bit different in that sense because they are used to being around people in that area. Even right now, the animals that are down in the Lakeshore State Park, they set off the fireworks that are down there off of that area. And I was asking the DNR manager, like, doesn't that like scare the animals? Like, don't they go running? Like, isn't that horrible for their habitat? And they basically said they've just adapted to it. So I think that's an interesting aspect though. And then Ben said, were there any instances about how animals can shape the humans on their own? I think that also is a great question. And it was kind of brought up before. And I think that's something I could also start to think about because I think that could just take this project another step further into thinking about, like it was mentioned, like the connection points and how those now will create more habitats where nests can be and so on. As in, not only providing a home, oh, sorry, and as in not only providing a home for these animals, but providing a place for them to create their own homes. I think that was kind of answered. Perhaps some design habitat for, perhaps some sort of for human designed habitat that accommodates animals' natural behaviors. I don't know if, Ben, you want to further explain on that question? I don't know if I totally am following with the rest of it.
No, I think it was all elaborating on the same question, so I think you.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Brittany, it's Kyle. I was wondering if you could click on the location tab.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think maybe for those who aren't familiar with the area, an important thing to note about this particular part of Milwaukee is that the Summerfest grounds are almost entirely concrete. And then for multiple blocks west of the Summerfest grounds, it's also parking lots, right? So there is not much in terms of natural habitat outside of the Lakeshore State Park and this, what I would always kind of consider this proposed oasis. So I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit to your thoughts on how, now that you've done this, I mean, I think early on we were discussing in the project, you know, had some scope creep, and it was like, well, maybe we'll just design the entire area, you know?
Right, yeah, right.
And then we pulled it back and you focused on the children's zone. But now that you've completed the project, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to how this might be a seed for rethinking that entire part of the city.
Yeah, so my initial plans, what I wanted to do, and this would be my next steps in the project, for two things. I would like to look at the Lakeshore State Park a little bit deeper and not necessarily implement any like play objects over there, but just think about the landscape. Like I had mentioned, it's really just native grasses right now. And even after talking with the DNR manager, she was saying that more needs to be implemented over there because it's just not enough to support the animals that are supposed to be down there. But also, I think I would really like to rethink the whole Summerfest grounds in terms of what we can attach to the pavilions to also start accommodating for habitat. And I think it's something that could easily be as simple as like attaching something to the side of one of the pavilions. But I would really like to take this a step further and really dig deeper into this whole place becoming a place for natural habitat, especially during those seasons that aren't necessarily being utilized for, because really right now they're just sitting there and they're only used June through August. So I think that'd be a really interesting aspect and how to take this project further.
Thank you. I think we can open it up to everyone. We've already kind of done that, I guess, the questions on the sidebar, but if there's a lot of people on the video chat, if there are any other questions or comments, please feel free to
I suppose, pardon me, I suppose I do have a question. Now that I'm seeing this, I don't know what we call it, a slide or page, again, exactly where is the tower now? Now that we're seeing this, for example, I'm interested. You had the very lively sort of rendition of where these things are that you were clicking on and showing us where they are. But maybe in this map that you have there of the festival grounds, are they located where the red dots are, or are those simply the entrances that you have noted there?
Yes, these are the entrances. So this map was actually done in my pre-design work. So this is the current conditions of the site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the observation tower, for example, would be right here. I don't know if can you see my mouse on this?
Yeah.
So it'd be right here.
Okay.
So really looking out into the Lakeshore State Park area.
And the other elements, like the owl, where the owls are.
I don't know how well I can zoom in here, but so the tower would be right here, and then the owl and bat habitats are kind of found throughout the elevated path, just for structure as well as variety of where they are. And then the rolling mounds again are throughout the entire landscape, so that's throughout the entire site. And then what am I missing here? The pavilion would span from basically here to here. And I think that's, and the education center is located in this south end corner underneath the mounds.
So the idea is that there's a bridge there as well. So that bridge where your mouse is right now, that would be new. Is that right?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So this is like an implementation of my design and the current conditions. So it was kind of like a pre-design work. But yes, so as you can see right now, there's only 2 bridges that cross over to Lakeshore State Park, which implementing another bridge is really just to draw that connection even further. And it almost looks like there should be a bridge because of that dip in Lakeshore State Park. But again, further, it's funny because after talking to the DNR manager, so as I mentioned, there's supposed to be an education center that's going around this area. And I asked why they wouldn't put it over here, and they said because they need to have bathrooms for the kids, and they can't walk those bridges that are that far. So that's why I also implemented a bridge that's going directly across so that the kids that are going from the education center to the Lakeshore State Park make an easier connection.
Okay, I think let's see if I can do this here. Maybe I can. The one thing there it is. So is it this one? I have no idea where the damn thing is. Yeah, I don't know if I can. Can I draw? Yeah, I can draw. Look at that. There we go. The one thing that I'm curious about is if I understand this correctly, we can come in from above, right?
Yep.
And
yep.
at the moment, and we can walk down here, and when the park is open, we can also go through the Henry Meyer Park, and then we can also do the circuit and walk back up. And so the thing that I'm curious about is, perhaps maybe it's a criticism too, is now you're creating this little enclave here that we can essentially go and visit, but we have to know about it ahead of time, right? I mean, it's not something that's naturally visible, I'm assuming, with the exception of this idea of the bridge that we can cross over.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And there is also another path, but again, it's connecting back here that goes here. That can walk as well. But yeah, you are correct in the sense that it is a little bit hidden back into the park and not as visible from like the street view.
Okay. So is this that line that you just drew? Is that something something that's new, or that might be that's an idea to, or that's actually going to be, for example, in the winter months, available for people to walk down?
That's actually there right now. So like as right now, I could go down and walk that. It is closed off, I want to say, during the winter months, but it would be my idea to just keep it open because I don't know why it is even shut off in the first place. It's just a park. So I'm not sure why it's closed off to begin with, but yeah.
I didn't realize that turquoise line that you just drew was open to the public. I figured that was part of the park and then closed down when there aren't the Oktoberfests and the Irish Fest and everything going on.
Yeah, it is a little bit hidden, but you can travel. So it's basically like you're in the park, but they put up barricades so that you can't actually get into the other parts. You can actually get into the park, you just can't get into the pavilions.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that's a change. I remember we used to try to sneak in there when the thing was shut down. So.
yeah, they allow people in there now.
Oh yeah, I see.
Britani, now that COVID has happened, I just wonder what your take on all this would be.
Yeah.
Some of the most amusing things I've seen is the amazing wildlife takeover of city centers even. Certainly where I live, birdsong is much stronger. The birds are getting far bolder. I had 3 or 4 magpies in my back garden today, which I've never had before. There are goats crawling over people's houses in Wales, and I'm sure you've seen all the videos.
Yeah, definitely.
So now that that's happened, do you think that you would need as much architecture? Do you need as much built form in the park if wildlife are so very capable of taking over by themselves? What do you think post-COVID about your project?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect. So in a sense, I also, relating to that, think it would be interesting to see if the animal evolution changes down here because of less human interactions in these areas. So if more animals are traveling to urban cities, but in terms of like the built versus the landscape, I don't necessarily know if, like, the education center obviously wouldn't be used by the animals and the observation tower, but I still think there's things in here like the path, for example, where they can still make that connection from Lakeshore State Park to the park. So I think that still is a necessary element to this project post-COVID, or thinking about that. but it raises an interesting point that
I think it just goes back to that earlier critique about, you know, why are you doing this? For whom are you doing this? What's the purpose of it? And if we now know that wildlife can rapidly, it's only been 6 weeks, and it's kind of remarkable what they've been able to do. So how much of what you're doing is for people, how much of it's for animals, and then what's the purpose of all of it?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Brittany, maybe just to clarify, I might have missed it, but are you keeping all of the existing buildings that are on the site and kind of infrastructures, or are you demolishing them and proposing your own?
Within like the children's zone area, or the whole
pink area that we see here?
No, so I would only be proposing redesign in this area.
Uh-huh.
And then my next steps would be to not necessarily demolish the pavilions that are currently existing there, but just how to take what's already existing and add on to it for habitat.
Mm-hmm. Or how to transform or deconstruct it, or use it somehow for habitat.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I just think this is related to some of the earlier comments and questions about thinking maybe bigger or beyond like your little site, but then the pink site, but then like even beyond the pink site. Sure. And this question of like animals taking over the kind of built environment makes me think of like images that you would see of Chernobyl or something too, like post kind of catastrophe, and like how quick that environment came back and was kind of rewilded. So anyway, and that's maybe related to my earlier comment about like, again, not being more pessimistic, but maybe being more realistic about, you know, how these ecosystems and how these living things, humans or animals, et cetera, organisms actually interact and kind of live symbiotically with each other in the world.
Right, yeah, I definitely agree.
Brittany, do you want to say anything about your design process or the tools that you use? Going back to kind of Jori's earlier comments about, you know, what kind of methodology one uses to design. I think it's always fascinating. So, you know, your sketches and physical models and SketchUp and Photoshop and whatever you've been using. Do you, especially now, you've done a 3-year master's, isn't that right?
Yes.
So which is kind of interesting to listen to you talk about your design process, how that's evolved over 3 years, and what you think worked well for you, what didn't, how it impacted on the way you were thinking about this project.
Yeah, definitely. So just in terms of how it's evolved over the past 3 years, I think coming into grad school, it was really hard for me to not look at things through an analytical sense, just coming from a math background. So in that terms, I think it's evolved from now thinking more about it in terms of sketch and design, and then thinking about the analytics of it. So for this project, though, I started off by, like I had mentioned, creating verbs that described both human and animal play, which are these ones that are found here in this slideshow. And then based off of that, I created different play objects that could be used by both children, adults, and wildlife. And then really started to study those further and see which ones did have the most potential to incorporate both humans and animals, and in an interesting way as well. And that weren't necessarily just plopped objects on a site, but instead started to become a formed landscape and blend all together. And then based off of those ones, I took it even further and started to look at now how they would be used at a day and a night sense, and then also took it one step further and thought about how it could maybe be used in the warmer months versus like winter. And then from there, it was kind of between that sketching and then modeling and back and forth. But that's when all of the COVID happened and kind of got shut inside. So then everything went more digital, and everything became kind of I was still trying to form make and make decisions through making forms, but in a digital world, if that makes sense. And then so I was going back and forth between Rhino and Photoshop to create all these images. I have a Mac, so I don't have abilities to have any rendering programs on my computer. So that sense was a little bit tricky that it wouldn't necessarily have been, but yeah.
I think that, again, that might be something to add to your website. Would be so you kind of showed us your sketches, but I would love to know how you tested those sketches. You know,
Sure.
how particularly in the world of living indoors and not having tutors to go talk to and not being able to sit next to somebody in studio, but that is critical. You learning that process of your own design ability is testing ideas, and the sketches at the minute kind of show us how you thought about that. But how, like, did you do sections? Did you those sorts of questions? I think that would be an interesting aspect to your website. We expect our later students to really reflect on method and methodology, particularly about going into a PhD or something like that. So I think that would be a if you have time to add that to your website, just a reflection on that, and as I say, the testing of all these the formal moves that you've made, I think would be very useful to you, and also then to show people your method.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And I might piggyback on that, because I know in the work that we do over here, we do a lot of model building, and even if they're working models, you know, those are the working models that help you create and fine tune and hone those ideas. And then of course there's some type of perhaps presentation model at the end. But I think exploring some of those things that you drew out in the sketches in a physical form, and then perhaps adding it, like Sarah was just saying, to your website, to the presentation, to your ideas, might help to clarify a few things, because unfortunately there's graphic architecture and then there's also the built aspect of it. Right. And the two are easy to complement one another, but difficult in some ways to let stand alone. You know, I mean, there's always some type of interplay.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Brittany, just one quick comment with regards to these sketches too. When I first saw them, I was like, oh, were these done by kids? That she was like asking, you know, like what type of structure or architecture infrastructure would you like to climb on, or imagine some towers, or like what kind of moundscapes would you love to frolic in? And so, I mean, it's kind of amazing that you have this ability, again, to kind of dream and imagine like this, you know, through your hand and your drawings. But I think it could be kind of wonderful to have some sort of kind of engagement activity with kids, maybe with the kind of stakeholders that you've been talking with downtown, just to kind of like basically try to get some feedback, because I'm always amazed by how much where our imaginations are inhibited as adults, and how much, you know, children are really able to kind of dream and kind of create these fantastic things that we sometimes
Sorry, I'm in a noisy space right now. I might not be able to
and so anyway, just think about that in the future. Like it could be a way to kind of gain some feedback and some ideas that would allow you to create and design structures that you maybe never imagined you could.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Okay, I think we're nearing our time limit here. If there's any final questions or comments.
Brittany, I just wanted to, you know, congratulate you on a really amazing project, and one where it's not people-centric, right? The architecture is almost secondary in some ways, which is also interesting. I just did have a thought about something to think about, and that is the bridge itself.
Sure.
Because when you were drawing on it, I began to think about what would the sort of loop be like from the wildlife perspective, right? And thinking about a part of the bridge that was just for animals, like what would the animal part of the bridge be like? In March, like right before all of this, we got shut down. My last trip was to Calgary, and Banff, which is in Parks, Canada, the Canadian Rockies, is only an hour away. So we took this drive up there, but over the highway there, they have bridges that are just for animals, caribou, large migrating, and it's just a landform that goes over the bridge. Looks like any other sort of overpass, but it's intended to be just for animals. But to think about, is there some sort of coexistence between the human traffic and the animal traffic that could happen actually across the bridge itself? And then a second point is that, you can take this or leave it, what would happen if the wildlife did take over the park, right? Because that place is empty for, you know, 9 months or whatever it is, maybe even more. I'm sure it's happening in small ways. I'm sure there are all kinds of bird nests and things throughout the park, but what would happen if it began to extend itself into the park in a much larger way? But a great project. I like the website too. I think that's a great way of presenting the work. and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I think that's a good comment to end on. Congratulations, Britani. Excellent project. Let's make sure to send it to Summerfest.
Will do. Thanks, everyone.
All right,
Nice
thank
work.
you.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done and good luck.
Thank you.
Brittany, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
And I just want to say thanks to our guest critics who joined us today. This is the end of their session, and we're super excited to have you. I'm going to follow up with an email question for you shortly at the end of the day, but I just wanted to say thanks again for spending some time with us virtually, and enjoy your day, whatever time it is in your wherever you are.
Yeah, it's
course.
beer o'clock here.
Yeah, I'll join you with that. Yeah.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Mo. It was so kind of you. I really enjoyed it. And congratulations to the students. What a relief. You've got a huge challenge this year. This has been a real struggle, so well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very good job. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah, good job. Bye.
Bye.